Tonight, entire towns cut off days after Hurricane Helene tore through the southeast. Israel expands its attacks, now targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen. And sharp rebuke from Republicans after former President Trump called Vice President Kamala Harris mentally disabled. We begin with the devastation caused by Helene. Dozens are dead and more than 1 million customers still without power. Towns isolated after what many are calling biblical floods, causing multiple bridges to collapse and destroying home after home. Cars line up for the scarcity of fuel. Florida's Big Bend region reeling from its third hurricane in a year. Remnants of Helene are still dumping rain on some areas, while another storm could threaten the Gulf Coast next week. Our weather team times it all out. Also tonight, Israel launches a large-scale air operation against the Houthi rebels in Yemen while unleashing more attacks on targets in Lebanon. Smoke is still rising from the scene where Hezbollah's top leader was killed. Prime Minister Netanyahu insists it's the price to be paid for attacking Israel. So what happens next? We're on the ground in Lebanon and Tel Aviv. Evacuations ordered outside Atlanta after a fire sends toxic smoke into the air.
When this plume starts out, it could become very, very dangerous.
Roads are closed, the smoke visible for miles. With just over a month until Election Day, former President Trump blasts Vice President Kamala Harris over her trip to the border and repeatedly calls her mentally disabled. That remark drawing strong criticism from members of both parties. A deadly plane crash near Memorial to the world's first plane flight. Help has arrived for 2 astronauts left behind at the space station, but why it could still be months before they're able to return home. Tensions rise as tens of thousands of dock workers prepare to walk off the job. What a strike could mean for Americans as we near the holiday season. Breaking news, Chris Christopherson has died. We remember the singer, songwriter, and actor who entertained us for decades. And America Strong tonight, a community spirit much more powerful than even the worst of storms.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this busy Sunday. I'm Lindsay Davis. Days after Hurricane Helene slammed into the southeast, the race is on to save lives in parts of the Carolinas. The storm is blamed for the deaths of more than 80 people across the region, but that number is expected to rise. Many are still unaccounted for in North Carolina, where Helene knocked out communications, making it difficult to reach people in more remote areas. Mudslides have made many roads impassable, cutting off entire communities. The devastation is widespread and catastrophic. Homes and businesses destroyed. North Carolina's governor is calling it an unprecedented tragedy. Further south in Florida's Big Bend, residents lined up at a seafood market that's been turned into a donation center. Across the south, there are shortages of essentials, including gasoline. ABC's Faith Abubey leads us off tonight from Asheville, North Carolina.
Tonight, widespread catastrophic damage across western North Carolina in Helene's wake. And across the southeast, the storm now claiming more than 80 lives and knocking out power to millions. In Asheville, North Carolina, Helene and a separate system dumping 14 inches of rain combined and as much as 30 inches in nearby mountains, triggering flash flooding and landslides.
This is an unprecedented tragedy that requires an unprecedented response.
More than 500 National Guards members joining local emergency responders, conducting search and rescue missions, delivering supplies and working to restore infrastructure. Asheville's water system severely damaged too.
It's heartbreaking because along this river we have a lot of wonderful stores, and we're going to be cleaning up a long time.
Residents facing long lines for gas all weekend.
Been a little chaotic, people been breaking in line.
As the flooding peaked Friday north of Asheville in Madison County, North Carolina, floodwaters sweeping this home away.
Get out of the way.
And across the border in Greene County, Tennessee,
Oh, God.
the power of those floodwaters on display as they rip apart a bridge. In Unicoi County, Tennessee, where authorities used helicopters to rescue more than 50 staff and patients that were trapped, this is what it looks like now. The debris left behind, the high water mark visible on the walls. Everyone at the hospital made it out okay, but more than 70 people in the county are unaccounted for. Helene roared ashore in Florida's Big Bend late Thursday night with 140-mile-per-hour winds after rapidly intensifying. going from a Category 1 to a Category 4 storm in less than 12 hours. In Steinhatchee, the seafood market now turned into a donation center.
I feel helpless, honestly, so I'm just doing what I can do. This is the third storm in a year. Like, I don't know how much more we can take.
The area struck by 3 hurricanes since August of 2023. And here in Asheville, Lindsay, the French Broad River, which is raging behind me, cresting at a new record level, nearly 25 feet. That is more than a foot higher than the previous record set more than 100 years ago. Lindsay.
One resident described it as a mini apocalypse. Such grave circumstances there. Faith, thank you. The remnants of Hurricane Helene are dumping rain on already saturated ground in Virginia as well as West Virginia, where flood watches are in place. WABC meteorologist Brittany Bell joins us now. And Brittany, tell us what you know about that and also a new disturbance that's heading for the Gulf of Mexico.
Lindsay, we still have 2 months left of hurricane season, so we cannot let our guard down. First, I want to start with Helene's remnants still dropping rain on parts of West Virginia and Virginia that recently received 2 to 6 inches of rain so far, prompting a flood watch. Those showers will stretch east through the overnight hours, getting closer to Maryland and Washington, D.C., getting showers all day Monday. Through Tuesday, rainfall totals could range between 2 to 3 inches in these areas, and Richmond could get closer to 3 to 5 inches of rain. Now, let's talk about our next tropical threat that is forming in the Caribbean Sea. That will eventually move into the Gulf of Mexico later this week. At that time, it could become a tropical depression or a tropical storm, possibly making landfall next weekend. So everyone along the Gulf Coast needs to watch this very closely. Lindsay?
The last thing that area needs. Brittany, thank you. Outside of Atlanta, evacuations were ordered when a fire at a chemical plant reignited today. The smoke and flames rising from the biolab plant in Conyers could be seen for miles. A fire broke out when water from a fire sprinkler reacted with a chemical. Firefighters initially put the flames out, but they sparked back up again hours later. No injuries have been reported, but several major roads have been closed. The local fire chief says this is the third major fire at the plant in 7 years. Now to the turmoil in the Middle East. Today, Israel conducted a large-scale air operation against Houthi militant targets in Yemen. Israel says the strikes were in response to recent attacks against Israel by the Iran-backed rebels. The operation comes as Israel continues to pound targets in Lebanon. Today, President Biden said he will talk to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu soon. ABC's Marcus Moore reports from Beirut tonight.
Israel delivering a heavy blow tonight in Yemen, conducting large-scale airstrikes against Iranian-backed Houthis, a third front in this war now approaching a year of relentless and deadly fighting. Israel saying the assault comes after Houthi militants fired a missile at Tel Aviv, and that today's retaliation was intended to weaken the Houthis and to send a message to Iran. Both the Houthis and Hezbollah, militants backed by Iran, have been designated terrorist organizations by the United States. Prime Minister Netanyahu today speaking at a press conference saying everyone sees the price paid by those who attack us. On Saturday, a Houthi spokesperson saying their attacks will continue, quote, until the aggression against Gaza and Lebanon stop. At the same time, Israel threatening ground operations into Lebanon. More than 100 people died today amid ongoing airstrikes throughout the country. Hezbollah has fired back with its own missiles, most of them intercepted in the skies above Israel. The IDF today announcing another senior Hezbollah leader, Nabil Kaouk, a member of the Central Council, was killed in an airstrike. And using U.S.-made bunker buster bombs, Israel believes it took out much of Hezbollah's top leadership, including the group's leader of the last 30 years, Hassan Nasrallah. U.S. officials say they only had a few minutes' notice from the Israelis before the strike. An Israeli official telling ABC News Israel targeted Nasrallah in part because he refused to separate the war in Gaza from his group's attacks in northern Israel. These images show a gaping crater in the Hezbollah stronghold of southern Beirut.
There's no question that the Hezbollah today is not the Hezbollah that it was even just a week ago.
As the fighting escalates in the Middle East, and the U.S. says they're still pushing for a ceasefire as deaths mount, President Biden today commenting on the violence.
Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to be. We really have to avoid it.
And Lindsay, Hassan Nasrallah's body has been recovered, but there's conflicting information tonight on when his funeral might take place. And also, Iran's president tonight reacting to the attacks on Iran's proxies, saying, quote, "We cannot accept such actions as they will not be left unanswered." He said a decisive reaction is necessary. Lindsay.
All eyes on Iran. Marcus, thank you. Israel's recent strikes are stirring fears of a wider conflict. Smoke could still be seen rising from the rubble of Friday's Israeli strike that killed Hezbollah's leader. Let's bring in ABC's Tom Sufi-Burridge in Tel Aviv. And Tom, the U.S. says that it will take every necessary measure to defend American personnel in the Middle East if Iran retaliates. What are Israeli officials saying about their next steps?
Yeah, Lindsay, they are saying that Israel's military campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon is by no means over. And the Israeli officials I've spoken to today are sounding confident. One saying there is a sense of euphoria in Israel after Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah was killed. They believe Hezbollah has been significantly degraded militarily, but they concede the group and its missiles still pose a real threat, as does Hezbollah's backer, Iran. And on Iran, one official telling me if Iran does hit back, then, quote, they'll be hit harder than they can imagine. The watchword, Lindsay, is deterrence. And Israeli officials say that massive strike on the Iranian-backed Houthis tonight in Yemen is part of it. The U.S. now putting additional forces on heightened readiness to be deployed potentially to this region on short notice. Lindsay?
Tom Sufi-Burridge in Tel Aviv. Thanks, Tom. U.S. officials say recent U.S. targeted strikes inside Syria have killed 37 terrorists, including top leaders. The strikes were conducted separately in mid-September. The U.S. says they were aimed at the leadership and operatives of ISIS, as well as an al-Qaeda affiliate in the region. And they say they succeeded in disrupting terrorist operations. Now to the race for the White House. With just 36 days to go, Vice President Harris and former President Trump are focusing on those all-important swing states. Trump rallying today in must-win Pennsylvania, where he resumed his attacks on Harris's mental capacity, while Harris is in Nevada. Here's ABC's Mary Alice Parks.
Tonight, former President Donald Trump in battleground Pennsylvania for the fourth time this month alone, blasting Vice President Kamala Harris's handling of the U.S.-Mexico border.
They're coming into our cities and our small towns here in Pennsylvania and all over the country. These towns are petrified.
Trump promising mass deportations if elected, his anti-immigrant message at the heart of his campaign. But it was his inflammatory comments Saturday calling Harris, quote, mentally impaired, that drew ire from Republican rivals and allies alike.
Now he's questioning her mental competence, and I think that's insulting not only to the vice president, but to people that actually do have mental disabilities.
The better course to take is to prosecute the case that her policies are destroying the country.
The vice president this weekend holding fundraisers in San Francisco and Los Angeles on the heels of her trip to Arizona's border, where she promised stricter border policies. Arizona's former Republican Senator Jeff Flake joining the ranks of Republicans like Liz and Dick Cheney endorsing Harris.
It's difficult to support a candidate who, having lost an election, tries to use the powers of the presidency to overturn that election.
And ahead of the first and only vice presidential debate Tuesday, polls showing Ohio Senator J.D. Vance trailing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in popularity by 15 points among registered voters. Minnesota Republican Congressman Tom Emmer helping Vance prepare.
Once he understands that Tim Walz is just going to try and deflect and go into this folksy whatever, he'll hold him accountable.
Yeah, I'm outside where Harris has her rally here in Las Vegas tonight. This is her second time coming to the state of Nevada since launching her presidential campaign. The polls showing the race absolutely neck and neck here. And Nevada, interesting because it's showing the mixed bag on the economy, too. Vegas has been booming, but voters also talking to us about their concerns over issues like childcare, housing, and the cost of living. Lindsay.
All right, Mary Alice Parks for us. Thank you. I'll join David and the team for the coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate of this cycle, hosted by CBS between Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance, beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern. Tonight, the two Starliner astronauts aboard the International Space Station are one step closer to coming home. Just before we came on the air, the Dragon 9 crew arrived at the ISS with 2 empty seats for astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore. Their 8-day mission extended to 8 months due to mechanical issues with Boeing's Starliner. Here's ABC's Ike Ajachi.
Freedom SpaceX on the Big Loop, soft capture confirmed.
Tonight, the SpaceX Crew Dragon 9 docking at the International Space Station, another crucial step in bringing home NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Elon Musk's SpaceX selected for the unprecedented launch Saturday. NASA pulling 2 crew members off the 4-seat vessel, leaving empty seats for Wilmore and Williams, who won't return until February 2025.
We, of course, trained together as a crew of 4, and now they're launching
working as a crew of two, but we will always be a crew that has trained together, and we will always be friends and colleagues.
The pair left at the International Space Station in June when NASA and Boeing decided to send the Starliner they were test piloting back to Earth, labeling it a commitment to safety. Boeing's Starliner has been plagued with problems involving thrusters and helium leaks, the spacecraft landing safely at the White Sands Missile Ranch in New Mexico in September. It took almost 29 hours for the spacecraft to autonomously dock at the station, NASA says traveling at 17,000 miles per hour orbiting the Earth. Lindsay?
Ike for us. Thanks so much, Ike. Top Biden administration officials are urging the dock workers union and the shipping industry to return to the negotiating table ahead of a looming strike. If the union does walk out at midnight on Tuesday, the impact on the U.S. economy could be catastrophic. Here's ABC's Rena Roy.
Tonight, 45,000 dock workers on the east and Gulf coasts are preparing to walk off the job, and it could be devastating for the U.S. economy. 14 ports from New England to Texas could shut down Tuesday at midnight. Up to 36 could be affected. Those crucial hubs responsible for nearly 35% of all U.S. imports and exports.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down.
The International Longshoremen's Association demanding higher hourly wages in their new contract and a ban on automated cranes, gates, and trucks. A prolonged strike could mean delayed shipping and higher prices for Americans on things like clothes, electronics, cars, and food like canned goods and fresh produce. The U.S. economy would take a direct hit.
It's estimated that a strike would cost somewhere around $5 billion a day.
The U.S. Maritime Alliance, representing the shippers and ports, says it's committed to negotiating, but claims the union is not bargaining in good faith. The Biden administration urging both sides to negotiate fairly and quickly.
Both sides have got to settle the strike. Support the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike.
Now, according to a senior White House official, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and other top officials met with the alliance to deliver that message. Lindsay?
Rena, thank you. There's still much more ahead on World News Tonight this Sunday, including late details on a deadly plane crash near the site that honors the Wright Brothers' famous first flight, and a remarkable sight in the sky over the Golden Gate Bridge. Next tonight, a deadly crash near a historic airport. The National Park Service says 4 adults and 1 child were killed Saturday when a single-engine plane crashed and burned near the First Light Airport in North Carolina. That airport celebrates the Wright brothers' first powered flight in 1903. The National Transportation Safety Board is investigating. When we come back, why a rising pop star suddenly canceled 2 concerts. To the index now, rising pop star abruptly canceled shows this weekend in New York and Maryland. Chappell Roan has said she struggles with mental health and released a statement saying things have gotten overwhelming over the past few weeks. She recently won the Video Music Award for Best New Artist. And next, a spectacular sight over San Francisco. Take a look at that comet rising above the Golden Gate Bridge at sunrise Friday morning. It's known as A3, but some astronomers have been calling it the Comet of the Century, and its appearance came as it flew as close to the sun as the planet Mercury. When we come back, America strong. The power of the storm was no match for one community's spirit. Finally, what Helene spared and resilience amid the destruction. Helene, the strongest hurricane to make landfall in the Big Bend area on record, is now testing the strength of Horseshoe Beach residents in that region as they return to what remains of their homes and lives.
Just had all new windows put in the house.
James Ellenberg's family has called this house home for 4 generations.
I wouldn't trade this lot for nothing. This is the third time in 13 months we've had the hurricane hit us. So, but I took my first step right here in this yard.
With all that's been lost, Charlene Huggins' faith remains intact.
This is my whole life. But we will come back. Good Lord goes before us, and we will come back.
After 5 generations of living here, she's learned resilience.
There's a lot of memories here.
One thing Helene spared, the shirt on her back, which says it all, blessed.
God's our strength. That's where our hope lies, is in Him.
Betsy Hamelink is in the same boat and also shares the same sentiment.
I feel blessed. And to come back and clean up, it's part of it. It's part of living on the coast of Florida.
Thanks so much for watching. I'm Lindsay Davis. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.